Hello and welcome to a video talking about the RC7 Leader Spheres. These are the spheres that came out at the same time that each of the units who came out for RC7 were released. So, you got Cerax, Giselle, Tarok, Rana, Hakazo, and catering. They didn't come out in that order specifically, but they came out like nearly around the same time, with Tarok, weirdly enough, being the last one to come out. And these spheres all activate each of those units' extra skills. As for the extra skills, it mentions that they need a BB sphere or their specific spheres. So for Cerax, he needs either a BB sphere or a Cerax Madness, just as an example. To get these spheres, you're going to need the Orbi shards, which you get. These function as tokens. You get them for doing raid class 7 missions, except for maybe Dichroma. Not entirely sure about that one. Don't quote me on that. Future Kaisen has it covered there. So you do the RC7 quests, and for beating the bosses, for taking down the arms and taking down the body, you're going to get the Orbi shards. These shards function as tokens that you can exchange in the Event Bazaar under the raid section of the Event Bazaar. And you're exchanging for 2 different sets of materials for each individual sphere, totaling out to 7,000 tokens needed to craft 1 sphere, for a total of 42,000 tokens needed. Now, an easy way to get these spheres to get the tokens for these spheres is to do each raid class 7 mission when they come out, if you haven't already done them. So, as an example, on Mondays we get access to Subterranean Shadow 2, which is the quest where you use the fire units. So you want to do, when Monday comes around, you want to do Jungle Hunt, Subterranean Shadow, and Subterranean Shadow 2, on top of getting tokens just for you know, going through the quest and picking them up as loot that drop from the enemies. If you're clearing it for the first time, you also get additional tokens just for the first time completion, which is super useful for getting a lot of tokens to craft each of these spheres. And with that out of the way, are these spheres worth it? Yes! They're very much worth it. But what do? I'm going to cover the highlights of what each sphere does. Each sphere is going to do more than what I'm talking about, and it will be on screen. But these spheres are very much worthwhile, even just for the element that you're using the sphere for. So for Cerax Max, again as an example, that works best on a fire unit, but its other buffs aside from the parameter boosts work outside of just that element. So these spheres all have 2 buffs in common. They all have a 40% boost to HP and a 100% boost to attack for their specific element. So again, Cerax Madness does that for fire units, as well as all of them having a defense ignore. The defense ignore is what gives these spheres the defense penetration, or whatever the defense penetrating sphere classification. So these are all the same type of spheres, so you cannot equip 2 of these spheres on the same unit, sadly enough. That would just be a little bit too broken out, honestly. But those are the only 2 buffs they have in common. So to start off, we have Cerax Madness. The buff that's worthwhile to talk about here is the 100% boost to spark damage. All of these spheres are going to have, on top of the parameter boost, either spark damage boost or elemental weakness damage boost. So it's going to be one of those 2 on top of other buffs as well. Some of these only have one thing that's worth talking about. For Cerax Madness, it's just the spark damage boost. It's sort of like a really good spark damage boost, and if you're putting that on a unit who has true perfect sparking, there you go. That's even more damage just for having this sphere on them. But that's about it for Cerax Madness. For Repair Chest, same story there. 125% boost to elemental weakness damage. So really good sphere for water units, especially for Giselle. So if you're using Giselle for your RC7, the 2 spheres I recommend having on her are this sphere for sure, and either Masked Steel Wheel if you already have it, or Lament of Dread if you have that. Because Giselle is not really much of a nuking unit, she's more of a support, to be honest. So having, you know, her sphere, which provides BC on Spark for the entire party through her extra skill, is really nice. That's one awesome thing about all these RC7 leaders, is that the part that they get from the extra skill for having these spheres is BC on Spark for the entire squad. that is great and makes some of these units that normally would be kind of, you know, not that great, just like really good support units. That buff right there is all they need to be support on top of, and that's like all they need. But they also provide other things as well. So these spheres, they're super easy to get. You can just like, you can go in with someone else carrying for you, doing these raids where you just sit back and relax and you still get enough tokens to win. So repair is really good for Giselle. Up next we have Cerax Bloodlust, the second best sphere, kind of. Tied with the next sphere we're going to be talking about. Cerax Bloodlust also has the 125% boost to elemental weakness damage, as well as a 25 BC cost reduction, which is great if you're trying to go for 0 BC on your units. Cerax Bloodlust not only works well for Terok, providing that BC on Spark, but also works really well on Armighty, getting Armighty closer to 0 BC, so you can use her for some cheesy business. And that's just 2 units it's useful for. You can use them on other units. The EWD is super useful even outside of Earth, so you can just like slap down another unit for 0 BC, and it's a good sphere for that. Up next we have Raans Calling, the other sphere that's really good. It has 100% boost to spark damage, which again is just more spark damage, just more damage. 100% more crit damage, which is critical damage does have a cap at 700%. But the less you have to fall around with that, the better, so it's less buffs you need. But it also has, and this is why people use Raans Calling outside of Thunder, 10% OD gauge fill added to BB SBB. That's instant OD gauge fill. So when you use the units who has this sphere equipped to them, their SBB, you get 10% OD gauge field added to the OD gauge. So if you put this on a unit like Sunkissed Tillith as an example, who has 18% boost to OD gauge field based on allies left alive, you get a total of 28% boost to OD gauge, which is over a quarter of your OD gauge just for using an SBB, which is fantastic. So yeah, Raans Calling is a really good sphere. You're probably going to use this more often than the other spheres on this list, but it's still really good. And that's where the peak is at, because up next we have hakazos Deceit, which is still not a bad sphere. It's got that 125% boost to elemental weakness damage, but it also has, I'm making a note of this, 75% boost to spark damage for the unit after they spark 15 times or more. So you're not going to get that 75% boost to spark damage immediately, but it will come in after you get those 15 sparks. And if you have a good enough squad, that's like turn 2 and you get that every turn afterwards. So it's a very nice buff. Probably another really good sphere for just general damage output, and really good for light units specifically. There are definitely better spheres out there for nuking, but this one's a very good one you can get really easily just for joining in on raids. And the last sphere to talk about is Catering's Tournament, which the only buff that's worthwhile to talk about on this is the 125% boost to elemental weakness damage. So, bit of a low note to end off on, having only just one worthwhile buff, but it's still, again, useful for catering to get that BC on Spark, like I mentioned with all the other units. So, yeah. All in all, it's very much worthwhile to get every single one of these spheres, even if it's just for the leader units specifically. Even if you're not using them as a lead, the fact that procs are extra skill effect for all allies makes these spheres worthwhile to get, like, anyway. Because otherwise you're using BB spheres, and while there are some good ones out there, you want to save them for your units who you want to have their BB gauge like full all the time. So having this just helps out with your entire squad keeping up with having their BB gauge full. So yeah, with that about does it for this video. Links to all our stuff down below, to our Twitter, Discord, and Patreon. Feel free to support us, leave a like down below. Any questions you have, let us know in the comments down below. And that is it. Thank you once again for visiting the Grand Guy Library. See you guys next time. Bye!